Hello, everybody. How we doing? Good. Okay, good. Yes, I know it's, it's that point in the semester, but just wanted to test. Make sure we're alive. Welcome to the Laurie Okuma Memorial Reading. My name is Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers Series. And tonight we are very excited to have an author who's joining us all the way from, as she describes it, a mini farm in Woodstock, Georgia. So we are excited to give her a warm West Coast welcome. But before we get to that, I'd like to thank those who have helped to make this series and this event possible. And that includes Markle Tumlin, my esteemed co-host, and our other friends from Love Library, Donyamuka Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I also want to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature for their continued support of this event. And our friends from Aztec Shops, Michael Ramirez, and our friends who are slinging books over there in the corner. Also, I am humbled to acknowledge the space that we are privileged to share this evening. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people were part of this land. The land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations. As members of the SDSU community, we acknowledge and celebrate this legacy. Tonight, I'd also like to issue a very special thanks to the Okuma family for the endowment that allows us to honor the memory of the beloved SDSU MFA alumna, Laurie Matsueda Okuma, by featuring the work of a woman poet or prose writer. In addition to earning her MFA, Laurie also taught at SDSU, and she was committed, like our author tonight, to bringing attention to women writers whose voices are often silenced. We were excited to announce last spring that Laurie's manuscript, The Whisper of Distant Waves, had been entered into special collections and university archives here in Love Library, and is now housed among many other impactful voices, including those from several of the other guest authors we've hosted over the years for the Memorial Series. So this just gives us another reason to celebrate her legacy tonight, along with her family's continued support. Just a few final reminders, if you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones, and do know, as you heard, the event is being recorded, but don't worry, all you see is this here. It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured author. Suzi Ehtesham-Zadeh is an Iranian-American writer, educator, and editor. Her work has appeared in the Georgia Review, SDSU's very own Fiction International, Glassworks Magazine, Quiddity International Literary Journal, Narrative Northeast, Mobius Journal for Social Change, and elsewhere. Dzanc, which is a collection of her stories from which she'll be sharing from tonight, received the 2022 Dzanc Short Story Collection Prize, an award that recognizes daring, original, and innovative writing. A career English teacher, Suzi has taught students in public schools, private schools, and universities on 3 continents and in 3 languages. She's also an accomplished editor and translator. In addressing acts of perseverance during difficult times, the great Toni Morrison asserts, "This is precisely the time that artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal." Suzi's collection Dzanc inhabits this edict. Begun before the woman life freedom moment gained momentum in Iran, and then continued as more protesters were killed in the Iranian government's brutal crackdown, these compellingly crafted stories go to work on portraying a nuanced view of contemporary Iranian women navigating a crucial moment in history. However, her work in Dzanc, described as an uplifting eulogy to the indomitable human spirit, reflects not only the experiences of women, but really anyone who has been silenced or marginalized, those who understand the importance of speaking truth to power. Suzi has been lauded as a writer of great humanity, global vision, wisdom, and heart, and we are so lucky to have her here with us tonight. So please join me in giving a warm, warm welcome to Suzi Ehtesham-Zadeh.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Professor Marshall, for that lovely introduction. I'm not sure I feel deserving of it, but and thank you so much to Mr. Okuma, and thank you to choosing me to be part of this series. It's a great honor to be here, and I flew all the way out from Atlanta to be here. And I also like to extend the thanks to my two friends sitting in the back, because they are hosting me in their beautiful home, and they were gracious enough to show me around your fair city today. I've not been here since I was a college student, which is many moons ago. And what a lovely place. So I'm really delighted to be here. So the teacher in me has made a slideshow. And I'm gonna start actually with the outline that I made, okay? Oops, I was afraid that would happen. A very simple outline, but nope, that's the end of the slideshow. What did I just do? I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
I already messed up.
No, it's all good. Here. There we go.
All right.
Thanks.
I'm not left-handed. I'll manage. Okay, so again, very simple outline. These are the three things I'm going to be addressing. I have a very great fear of being boring, so I thought maybe having some images would be helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the book and the context, a little bit of personal history. Then I'm going to do some readings. I'm going to read from 3 different stories instead of reading from just one. And I'm going to provide a little bit of background for each of those stories, and then I have some closing remarks. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 40 to 50 minutes or so. Okay, so first, I'm going to start by addressing the question that I'm going to eventually address is why I write and why I wrote this book. But I'm going to start with the question of why anybody writes anymore. You know, you can see here that we are living in an age of book banning. I'm sure all of you are very aware of that. And on this side, this is an article from Atlantic Monthly last month about college students not reading, even, you know, graduate students in literature not being able to finish a book. So writing has become kind of an odd thing to do, I think. And it's also become, in my case, and in the case of the writers that Toni Morrison talked about, it's become somewhat of a subversive activity. So here you've got 2 of my favorite writers, Kafka and then Azad Nafisi is the woman who wrote Reading Lolita in Iran, talking about, you know, what writing can do in a time of despair. And so it has indeed become a subversive activity. I didn't set out to write a subversive book, but it kind of happened and became that way. For Iranians in particular, these 2 people are people who have been targeted by the Islamic government recently. The one on the left is Mahsa Amini, and she is the woman who started the Stealthy Freedom movement, which actually appears in my book. It was a Facebook page, started out as a Facebook page and then spread around the world. Recently, at the same time that there was a plot to kill President-elect Donald Trump, there was a plot to abduct her and kill her. And I think she might be currently in hiding. She has spoken out about it. But anyway, she's an activist. This man is an Iranian businessman who was abducted off a plane, taken to Iran, and summarily executed very recently in October. So it's scary to be writing a book in which you're, you know, whether directly or indirectly condemning a government that is brutal. So anyway, like I said, writing can be quite subversive, and I think my book is a little bit subversive. So the other obstacle to writing, besides the fact that no one reads anymore, and besides the fact that it's subversive, is that it's hard work. If anybody in here is a writer, some of you might be, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I always tell people I hate writing, and I actually kind of do, because it's you know, I'm a perfectionist, and it's a lot of work. So yeah. Okay, so this is silly, but I put up a picture of a carpenter because I'm trying to de-glamorize the act of writing here, because it's often glamorized. Writers, like carpenters, take raw materials and then use tools to fashion them into something useful. It could be argued that furniture is more useful than a book is in some ways. I have zero skill with hammer and nails. My son is very skilled in carpentry, and he winces every time I so much as hang a painting on the wall. But obviously my raw materials are my memories and thoughts and images and so forth, and my tools are words. And I was born with the great fortune of having two sets of words because I grew up in a bilingual family. So, I've got a lot of words to work with, and both languages appear in my book. Actually, I later added a third language when I married a Spaniard, married into a third culture, sort of confusing myself even more. But yeah, so at the same time that I had two languages, I also had two cultures. And for much of my life, at least since 1979, my two cultures have been hostile to one another. Sorry. And that has created kind of a civil war inside me. And, interestingly enough, that actually is very good material. So a lot of what I write about, if I had to choose a single overarching theme in my book, it would be culture straddling, which is something I'm very practiced at doing. So having two cultures and two languages really is the meat of my work. It doesn't just bleed into my work, it is my work, I think. So the Iran that I grew up in, I'm sure you're familiar with these people, maybe not. Anyone? This is the Shah and Empress of Iran back before the Iranian Revolution. Okay, the Shah of the Iran of my youth was a very different place from the Iran today. Okay, these are two of the Shah's palaces. Interestingly enough, the current president of Iran doesn't reside in these palaces, but adjacent to one of them. So, sort of the more things change, the more things stay the same, a little bit. But this is my American mother when she moved to Iran in the 60s. Okay, so if she were if this were today, obviously she would not be able to appear without a headscarf and straddling a donkey, wearing a sleeveless shirt. So, and that's me, my American mother, 1960 something. And this is my Iranian family in Iran, sort of Iran's version of a Leave It to Beaver family, I guess, if you will. I'm the one in the baggy bathing suit. I don't know where my mom got the bathing suits from, but anyway, so. And again, there's me with a transistor radio listening to American music in my back porch. At some point, though, this is what happened. Okay, so this is my family. I think this is from 1996, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I had to take on a new identity. You can see in that picture, I'm not very happy about it. Okay, but it is possible to smile when you wear a hijab. I have a lot more to say about the hijab later on. There are a lot of hijab in my book. I'm sure you notice them. So I had to develop a whole new identity, and that identity was very strictly enforced. And this is not a picture out of The Handmaid's Tale. These are actual members of the guidance patrol or morality police who still circulate in the streets of Iran and arrest women for violations of the hijab. And the violations of the hijab can be anything from wearing it too loosely to, and we're gonna talk more about the women's movement later on. So here's the morality police arresting women, and yeah. Then in 2004, my father died. My father was my role model and hero in many ways. And after he died, that's when I started writing. That sort of lit the fire in me to write. I had been writing before that time, but I started writing in earnest because I felt like all of Iran was going to die with him if I didn't start writing things down. So I started writing, and my writing morphed into fiction. My writing is very autobiographical, as I'm sure you've noticed. It's not exactly autofiction, but there's a lot of autobiography in it. So, okay, the other spark for this book was the death of this woman. Okay, this is Mahsa Amini. She is a young Kurdish woman who, at the age of 22, was arrested in Tehran for wearing her hijab too loosely. It wasn't that she wasn't wearing one, it's that she was wearing it too loosely. She was on her way to university, about to start university, and she was arrested, taken off in a police car, and her brother was with her. They told him she'll be returned after she's re-educated or whatever, and then they later found out that she had been savagely beaten. So she became sort of the George Floyd of Iran, and started the Zan Zindagi Azadi movement, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That movement became the kind of the catalyst for me writing this book. It also provides what I would call the connective tissue of the book, even though only a few stories in the book are actually directly about the movement. But when that movement happened, I started feeling the need to sort of reconnect with my homeland. So yeah, my writing took a turn at that time. So the first and last stories of the book are directly about the movement. They're also very personal for me. And there's a few others. There is some weaving of the women's movement. All the female protagonists in my book, I would say, are somewhat rebellious, okay, in a way. So yeah, so in that sense, the book is about the movement. So, this is Mahsa Amini's, this is the movement that began. And it was, are you familiar with it? Did you guys hear about it? Okay, so it spread all around the world. It was spoken about in the UN, world leaders talked about it. Women very, very courageously went out and faced tanks. And 551, I think at last count, women were killed, and many others were taken into prison, and some are still awaiting a trial and possible execution. So, just a few images from this movement. Again, like I said, the movement spread around the world. I don't know what country this one is from. This is not from Iran. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on, but it's not only about the hijab, and it's not only about hair. Women and Iranians in general have a lot of other grievances, so it's not just about the hijab. And we're very good at sort of reductive thinking and thinking that reducing Iranian women to hijab, there's a great deal more to to them and to their fight. I love this picture, and it always just, I don't know, gives me a lump in my throat. And these are some of the women who were executed, and there's Khamenei, the hanging judge, looking very much like a hanging judge there. Activism on the part of Iranian women is not new. It's been around for a very long time. Shirin Ebadi won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 for her activism. She currently works in in London, operates in London. And this is Narges Mohammadi, who was last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, currently languishing in prison. She has been in and out of prison for many, many years. And last I heard, she had some kind of medical condition and was being denied medical treatment. As far as I know, she is still alive, but she is currently in Evin prison. So the book is also a little bit of a tribute to Iranian women, and I've dedicated it to the courageous women of Iran. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what I want the takeaways to be from the book later on. So, okay, I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from 3 different stories, and I've chosen them based on what's on the back of my book, okay, which is Complex Lives of Women, Iranian Women Today, those who continue to suffer oppression under the Islamic Republic, those who are crafting new identities in America, and those who hover somewhere in between. I'm sort of the latter type, I guess. Someone recently mentioned to me that being from 2 cultures is kind of like sitting between 2 chairs. I think that's a really apt description of what it's like. So I'm going to read a story from each of these, or an excerpt of the story from each of these kinds of protagonists. So, all right. A little bit of background about each of the excerpts I'm going to read. So, the first story is called Ab, okay, and this one is set in Iran. This story is really personal for me because I love swimming. I'm not I'm not a champion swimmer by any means, but I get my ideas when I'm in water. I know that sounds kind of weird, but that really is how it happens. When I'm moving through water, I find that my thoughts flow. This story is about, it's about a woman swimming, a woman skinny dipping. That's not any kind of spoiler because that's actually on the cover of the book. So, when I was growing up, this is what the Caspian on the left is what the Caspian Sea looked like. This is what it looked like today. And that curtain there, I can't imagine how much it must cost and how much labor must go into putting those curtains up. The Caspian seashore has curtains like that. Women must stay on one side of them. Okay, and they cannot swim unless they're not visible to men. Okay, so that's what it's like now. If you look closely, the little girl in the picture is wearing an American flag on her bathing suit. Just thought that was an interesting detail. Okay. This is what it's like to swim in Iran today, swimming with full hijab. And it takes some of the pleasure out of it. On the left, this is from the Asian Games of 1974. I actually know the woman with the white bathing cap. She's a good friend of mine. She was a champion swimmer. This woman on the left is Nargis Mohammadi. She is a record breaker, but she's been denied a lot of her records because she's, it's been deemed that her swimming costume was not appropriate. She's 42 years old. And she swam 20 kilometers and broke a record with full hijab that weighed 6 kilos. Okay, so she added 6 kilos to her weight. She does a lot of rebellious things. So she's also gone swimming in handcuffs and broken all kinds of records for swimming with handcuffs, one hand tied behind her back. She's very cool. So. And then just a quick picture of women's sports then and now, okay? So they're not allowed to swim in the Olympic Games. They are allowed to compete in the Olympic Games, but they must do so in this kind of costume, which obviously is a great disadvantage, so. Okay, so I'm gonna put this picture up while I read the excerpt. This excerpt is just from the end of the story. Like I said, it's not a spoiler because you already know what's gonna happen. She doesn't know what compels her to get out of bed. It is not a rational or deliberate decision. Soundlessly, she pulls back the covers, swings her legs over the mattress, finds her slippers with her feet, and slips them on. Using the light of the moon to guide her, she walks over to the place where her rupush and headscarf are hanging, lifts them from the hook, and puts them on over her pajamas. She opens the door gently, walks down the narrow hallway to the elevator, and pushes the button for the lobby. When she enters the lobby and sees a man behind the desk, she has a moment of panic, thinking she might be stopped and interrogated. She doesn't believe it is against the hotel's rules for a guest, even a young, unaccompanied woman, to leave the hotel room and go for a walk, but just in case, she quickly plans what she will say. She has a headache and needs to get some air. Men do not question women who say they're in any kind of pain, as this could be an indirect reference to their menstrual cycles. The man behind the desk looks up and sees her, but he makes no attempt to stop her. Outside, the moon, which is almost full, shimmers on the surface of the sea. The air is brisk for May, and there's a gentle breeze. Minu's rupush and headscarf flap around her as she walks, but the sensation is pleasant. The moon's reflection draws her forward, and she aims directly for it, then realizes that the light is everywhere at once, dancing all across the water. She sees no toxic bubbles and smells no foul odors. Guided by the moon's light, she moves down the shoreline until she comes to the men's section of the beach, which is not enclosed by a fence. The hotel is some distance away, and there's no one else about. As soon as she realizes she's alone, she knows exactly what she wants to do, and she does not hesitate. She strips off her headscarf, her slippers, her rupush, and her pajamas, and deposits them on the shore. Then she walks, naked, into the water. The water encircles her, caressing first her ankles, then her knees, then her inner thighs, then her breasts, then her shoulders. Finally, she submerges her full head into the sea until she feels her hair floating on the surface. She's never learned to swim, but her arms know what to do. She moves them with the rhythm of the waves, buoying her body and propelling it forward. Every part of her body comes alive. Unafraid, she plunges deep below the surface again and again like a fish. Each time she rises for a breath, she whispers, ob. Okay, so, yeah, the Caspian Sea has become toxic. I recently read an article about it. It's like, you can see bubbles on the surface and it's dying. So this is very sad. Okay, so that's an excerpt from a story about a woman currently living in Iran, the woman who performs a rebellious act and goes and strips and goes skinny dipping in the Caspian. I don't know anyone who's actually done that, but I'd love to do it someday. So anyway, okay, the next excerpt I'm going to read is from a story called Many Sides. This story takes place in the United States, and the protagonist is an Iranian-American woman. Okay. It's not necessarily my favorite story, but I think it's my most explosive story in a lot of ways. It's got a lot of themes in it. Many of them I think resonate with a particular moment. It takes place on the night of the Unite the Right rally in 2017, and the protagonist and the young American man witness the killing of Heather Heyer together. It creates sort of a bond between the two of them. Other themes in this story, and some of them appear in this excerpt that I'm going to read. The Iran-Iraq War, okay, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, a war in which about 1 million people died, most of the deaths on the Iranian side, a war in which the United States supplied weapons to Iran, okay, to Iraq, and weapons that were used to kill and gas Iranians. Well, we supplied weapons to both sides. Interestingly enough, and you can look this up if you don't believe me, Israel provided weapons to Iran. So again, the more things change, the more things stay the same, or I don't know. Yeah, war is war. It's a horrible thing. So that's mentioned in this excerpt. Islamophobia is also mentioned in this excerpt, and it's still alive and well, along with other kinds of phobia. We're very good at hating. This is a dish that is mentioned in this excerpt, one of my favorite dishes. It's called Laurie Matsueda. It's not very appetizing looking, but it's absolutely delicious. You should try it sometime. Okay. And then these are a couple of other things that are mentioned in this excerpt. The stickers that appeared in the textbooks in Cobb County, there was a whole lawsuit about them, claiming that evolution was just a theory. Bullying, which is mentioned in this excerpt. The whole definition of freedom and the many ways in which freedom can be defined, and saying the Pledge of Allegiance in the classroom. All of those appear in this little excerpt. So like I said, it's kind of explosive. All right, I'm just putting up a Persian carpet because I don't want to put up something distracting. Okay, so this conversation is from before they witnessed the Unite the Right rally, although it's already happened, but then they watch a part of it together on TV. Okay. After his fourth screwdriver and her second, they found themselves seated on the Persian rug with their backs against the couch. Ethan took a long sip of his drink and then looked at her with a challenge in his eyes. Okay, so I need to know why someone like you, with your looks, your brains, and your money, ends up in an EA support group. Although it was obvious that the question was a serious one, Azita, who was feeling a bit lightheaded, chose to answer him teasingly. I think it goes back to the moment of my conception. I was conceived during an Iraqi bombing raid on Tehran. There were almost nightly bombing raids back then, and my parents, who were newlyweds at the time, had to go down to the basement to take cover. On the night I was conceived, the bombing raid was really intense, and I guess the fear must have stoked my parents' passion. I don't quite follow, said Ethan. How does being conceived in a basement lead to a support group 30 years later? I don't know, I guess I was born angry. As you know, those Iraqi bombs that almost killed my parents were manufactured by the US, like most of the bombs in the world. When my mom first told me that story as a child, I remember feeling a sense of panic at the thought that my parents might have died and I might never have come into being. When I thought about it later, after I understood where babies came from, I started seeing my parents as anti-imperialist heroes. Even the sperm and the egg had fought valiantly against the evil American empire, the great Satan, as they call it in Iran. Anger is almost a part of my DNA. Ethan looked thoughtful. I think your theory contains a glaring contradiction. The way I look at it, you should be grateful for American military might. You owe your very existence to it. You've got a point, she responded. Maybe the damage came later, like when I was tormented by my classmates in school. She said this lightly, but Ethan scanned her face with genuine concern and reached over to touch her arm. Do tell, he said. Zita wasn't sure where to begin. It probably started in middle school, she said. I attended a public middle school in Cobb County at the time when they had those stickers inside of science textbooks announcing that evolution was just a theory. Remember those? Anyway, I didn't fit in. I was a visible minority, which didn't help. I guess I was just an easy target. It didn't matter that I'd only lived the first year of my life in Iran, and that after my parents fled to Atlanta, I'd only visited occasionally during the summer months. It didn't matter that I'd grown up in Georgia, that I was much more comfortable speaking English than Farsi. In Cobb County in the 90s, it was enough just to look Middle Eastern and to have a foreign name. Obviously, I'm sure you stuck out all over the place. And the boys might have ridiculed you, but secretly, they probably all had the hots for you. The playfulness of this remark made her realize that anger was beginning to spill out of her, and she wondered if this might be Ethan's way of trying to lighten the conversation. What was it about this near stranger that made her want to fling open her emotional floodgates? She probably shouldn't trust him so completely, but now that she'd started, she wasn't sure how to stop. Actually, it was mostly the girls who tormented me, she said. Here she paused and thought back on the incidents of bullying in middle school. A lot of it was about the food her mother packed her for lunch, which was almost always Persian. One time, her lunch was ghormeh sabzi, her favorite Iranian stew made of spinach, fenugreek, and dark red beans. A blonde girl sitting next to her in the cafeteria watched in horror as she opened her lunchbox, then asked her if someone had thrown up in there. Everyone at the table laughed, including some girls she had thought of as friends. A few days later, she pulled out her lunchbox in the cafeteria and was surprised to find a note inside. Someone had sketched a crude skull and crossbones on it, and beneath it were the words poison, Islam food. The memory of these incidents made tears well up in Azita's eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She looked over at Ethan and saw the softness in his expression, and again she was struck by his beauty. He was waiting for her to continue, so she found her voice. When I was in high school, the bullying came from all sides, boys, girls, even teachers. After 9/11, it was mostly political branding. One of my best friends from childhood looked at me one day out of the blue and asked why I didn't wear a headscarf. A boy from my math class approached me at my locker one morning and snarled, "Hey, didn't I just see you on TV last night shouting death to America?" The social studies teacher turned to me in the middle of class one day and said, "I sure hope you'll stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance, Azita, because that flag stands for freedom." "Ha ha, right, freedom," Ethan laughed. "Who was it who said freedom for the pike is death for the minnows?" Azita closed her eyes, the memory bit her. She just entered the 10th grade when the World Trade Center came crashing down. Like any other American that September, she found it impossible to tear herself away from the haunting images, the planes slicing through the glistening windows of the towers as though they were made of paper, the dazed and horrified people on the streets, the ghastly gray smoke, the bodies falling through the air in slow motion against an obscenely blue sky. She was spellbound by the vicarious sense of heroism and courage, utterly engulfed by the collective consciousness. She wanted to share in the grief and horror of her classmates and teachers, but they wouldn't let her in. Ethan touched her arm again. "Sorry, didn't mean to jump in there," he said. Azita shook her head. "It's fine. I was just remembering. When I was in 11th grade, I went with an American friend named Betsy to a 4th of July picnic at Stone Mountain. Before the fireworks began, they projected this video on the granite outcropping. It was the usual patriotic message about the brave men and women in uniform who fight for our freedom, blah, 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 blah. But this time, instead of a bunch of soldiers smiling, cradling foreign-looking children in their arms, it was totally militaristic, with these attractive male and female soldiers dressed in sparkling uniforms, flying airplanes, saluting, and marching with their weapons up. I turned to Betsy and asked her to explain how exactly killing Afghan, Iraqi, and Pakistani civilians gave us freedom. I was genuinely interested in the answer, but she just stared at me as though she didn't understand the question. So that's from many sides. Some of that is based on my daughter's experience. She did go to a Cobb County school and she was very, very much bullied for her food and for various other things. So that one is, hits pretty close to home. So, Okay, so the final excerpt I'm going to read is from a story called The Baboon. It's interesting because the story it takes place in Iran, and it takes place in a very beautiful orchard in the mountains. But the excerpt I'm going to read is from an airplane. So it is literally hovering between two cultures because it is a scene in which the couple the story is about are landing in Tehran. So the story also has a number of themes. Well, there's the airplane. Okay, so that's what it looks like to land in Tehran. And that's what the flight attendants wear on Iran Air flights. I think that's a pretty recent picture. So the story addresses the hijab. Like I said, there are many hijabs in my book, and this story, a woman has to put the hijab on in the airplane, and that does actually happen. If you're flying in the Iran Air, you wear the hijab from the very beginning, but if you're flying in any other airline, you have to put the hijab on before landing. So, okay, that's what it looks like inside Tehran Airport, just to give some visual images. The story mentions anti-American propaganda, which is everywhere in Iran. Okay, you are met with signs like this when you go out on the streets of Tehran. That's a lovely mural there. And children from a very early age are learned this message of hatred, down with the USA, down with Israel. Okay, so I'm putting this image up as I read this excerpt, and this is like I said, it's from hovering in between the two cultures. And the protagonist of this story, whose name is Roya, is she lives in the United States, and she takes her American husband back to Iran, and as soon as she gets him there, she realizes how a chasm opens up between the two of them, and she realizes that he just doesn't get it. He's a very well-meaning and very nice person, but there's just something missing there. Okay. If anything has disturbed Andrew since their arrival in the Islamic Republic, he's done a good job of hiding it. Roya herself is having more difficulty adjusting. The last time she visited Iran, she was a mere child and didn't have to bother with the hijab. But this time, as the plane was descending toward Imam Khomeini Airport, she was forced to go into the tiny toilet to transform herself before she could enter the country as a woman. In her purse, she carried a makeshift rupush rusari. The headscarf was fashioned from a dull gray fabric remnant she bought at Walmart, and she found an old raincoat to use as the substitute for a rupush, leaving the sash open to avoid accentuating the contours of her body. When she leaned in close to examine her reflection in the plane's distorted bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a nun wearing a mismatched habit. She caught Andrew's eye as she navigated the aisle back toward her seat. She could tell that he was startled by her transformation, but true to form, he covered his reaction with an attempt at humor. He flashed her a mock salacious smile as she sat down beside him. "Wow, you look amazing," he whispered. "Makes me want to rip all those clothes off and see what's underneath." "Nice try, Andrew. You know I look ridiculous," she answered. She was so aware of how ridiculous she looked that she could feel her face burning as they entered the terminal and walked down the long corridor toward border control. Andrew had not undergone a transformation before entering the airport, but somehow he looked ridiculous too. He was a full head taller than most of the other passengers, and his blonde hair, which swirled around his head like a lion's mane, seemed to be a defiant proclamation of his alien presence in the dark-haired crowd. Even when the Border Patrol subjected Andrew to an interrogation, he remained as calm as the Sphinx. "Which side will you fight on in the war?" "Which war?" "The one that's coming. The United States and Israel against Iran." "Neither side." Roya's heart had pounded so violently when she translated this exchange that she felt certain it was visible beneath her rupush. Her Farsi was rusty after so many years away, and seeing a Kalashnikov rifle at such close range didn't help to put her at ease. But the customs official had been too fascinated by Andrew to pay much attention to her nervousness or her grammar. His face broke into a toothy smile as he welcomed them both to Iran, sending them directly under the stadium-sized banner that read "Marg Bad Amerika," Death to America. On their first foray out into the Tehran streets the next morning, Roya was reminded again of how out of touch she was with her country. The women sashayed through the streets in brightly colored scarves draped seductively around their shoulders, exposing lots of hair and drawing attention to their heavily made-up faces. Their rupushas were form-fitting and ended just above the knee, and beneath the tunics their legs were covered in skin-tight leggings. That same afternoon, Roya went to a surprisingly upscale shopping mall in North Tehran to buy a more contemporary Islamic costume. Now that she's in her grandfather's bog, she's finally freed from the absurd costume altogether. Out on her grandfather's balcony tonight, Roya can feel the night breeze fluttering through her hair for the first time since she's been back in Iran. And this, like her memory of the stars and the moths, is helping her to remember that she belongs here, that this is, in a sense, still her home. She spent every summer of her childhood in this bog in the company of her cousins, riding donkeys, climbing mountains, picking fruit straight from the trees. Despite decades of tyranny, there is no repressive regime to contend with in this beautiful patch of land nestled in the Zagros Mountains. Okay, so those are the excerpts I'm going to read, and I want to end with some concluding remarks. I'm always asked, in every talk I've given, I'm asked what I want the takeaways to be. That's an obvious question. It's a hard question because, you know, I want the takeaways to be a lot of things. But I'm gonna address that a little bit. One of the takeaways, one of the things I hope my readers will come away with is an idea of Iranian women as just normal people. Okay, the Iranian women are often seen through a very narrow lens. Either they're seen as these oppressed, repressed, suppressed, depressed people, or they're seen as warriors. And there certainly are Iranian women, and in my book, there are Iranian women who are both of those kinds of women, but they're also just normal people. There are also Iranian women who are very vulnerable, like the character in the story that I just read, and that story, Many Sides, who's been to a support group because she's, you know, she's having trouble contending with feelings of guilt for being the kind of woman that she has become. So I just want to humanize Iranian women. That's one of my goals, and I hope I achieve that. This is Iranian university students, okay, 65, I think it is, 65% of university students in Iran are women, contrary to popular belief. Okay. So, yeah, I said I was going to address the hijab later. The hijab has a very long and convoluted and layered history in Iran. At one time, in 1936, the Shah's father, okay, Reza Shah, actually banned the hijab, okay? This was an attempt to modernize Iran. And for many women in Iran, that would be like if someone were to tell you tomorrow, go out naked into the street, okay? They were not used to going out in public with their heads uncovered. So it was quite a horrifying thing. And then, of course, that fell by the wayside with the Shah. And then in 1983, I was actually in Iran at the time, it became mandatory to wear the hijab. There are only 2 countries in the world right now where the hijab is mandatory, and they are Iran and Afghanistan, not Saudi Arabia. They lifted the ban a couple of years ago. So what I've put up here is something that I see is hypocrisy of foreign powers and people who cry crocodile tears over the hijab, that, you know, Iranian women being forced to wear the hijab. All those same people are eroding the rights of women in this country. So it's been weaponized. This obviously is weaponized by the Iranian government. Okay, and obviously no one is going to deny that it is a way of keeping women down. Okay, but it's also become a weapon for Iranian women themselves. So in the last excerpt that I read, I referred to these very upscale hijab stores, okay? And Iranian women managed to be very, very beautiful and very, very seductive, even with the hijab. So that's one of the ways in which they weaponize the hijab. So, and the other way, of course, is the hijab is currently a weapon of their fight. So this fight is ongoing, even though the Women Life Freedom movement fizzled out. There was recently an incident in front of Azad University where a woman stripped down to her underwear in public. Okay, she was arrested. She has not been seen since. But how courageous do you have to be to do something like that? So women continue to fight. My late father was an OBGYN, okay? He worked with Iranian women, and he often said that the next rebellion would come, that it was going to be women who would topple this government. I believe that. So yeah, so I mixed a bunch of things together, but the hijab is, it's not as simple as it may seem, okay? And like I said, it's currently being used as a weapon. So, and I said earlier that the struggle of Iranian women is about more than the hijab. It certainly is. There's so many issues that Iranian women and Iranians in general have to contend with. The hijab is only one of many. So again, one of the takeaways I hope is to move away from this reductive thinking that Iranian women are just hijab, though these heavily cloaked women who are nothing beneath the cloak. So, okay. I don't think that good literature should be didactic. This is a picture of Persepolis. But I do hope that one of my takeaways will be that people will learn. I've had a lot of people tell me that they had to stop while reading and look things up. Maybe that's not what you're supposed to do when you're reading fiction, but I'm pleased to hear that. I did research when I was writing the book, and I like books where I learn things. So I hope that some information is transmitted in my book. That's another of the takeaways that I desire, okay? But in addition to information, I hope there'll be some appreciation. One of the things that I hope there'll be appreciation for is that we're all part of the same human family. I know it's really, really corny to say that, but I don't know. I hope that that my readers will feel some kind of common bond of our common humanity, sisterhood, humanhood, whatever. So I actually took this picture many, many years ago. But anytime you see children, you realize that people are people. Yeah. So yeah, again, another message I would hope people will take away is that people are not their governments. Okay. So that's what this is supposed to illustrate here. Israelis don't hate Iranians, and Iranians don't hate Israelis, although our governments are at each other's throats all the time. So ultimately, I hope that people, readers, when they finish reading this book, will feel their hearts and their minds expanded. I mean, that sounds like a very, very noble goal. But I think great literature should do both things. So, okay, that's it. I have some images here of Iran. I can scroll. I don't know what time it is. How are we doing for time?
I'm not sure why there's the chime, and don't know what that is for.
Oh, okay. Am I doing it?
No,
Maybe?
it's something, yeah. The computer is, yes.
Yeah, are we okay for time?
Yeah, if you want to show a few more.
Okay, so these are just some pictures of Iran. I'll just make some brief comments. This is the bazaar. Okay. Very.
No, yeah, I know. Maybe it's yes, something's gonna happen.
Just, the bazaar is a fascinating place. When I was a kid, I used to like to go there and just rummage. There's all kinds of fascinating things there. And then Tehran has one of the largest bazaars in the world. This is the holy city of Qom, which is, and this is Isfahan. Some of the mosques, Islam has inspired some very, very beautiful art, and these mosques are absolutely gorgeous when you see them both inside and outside. Whatever your religious persuasions may be or how you feel about the Islamic Republic, there's no denying the beauty of some of these buildings. This is Tehran, and that is Milad Tower, which is one of the largest or tallest communication towers in the world. I've never been inside it. I think it was finished, can't remember, but pretty recently. And that's a close-up of it. So, Tehran has, if I'm not mistaken, 10 million people. It's a huge, huge, huge city. That's Mount Damavand. This is actually, Tehran's on the other side of Mount Damavand. It's the volcano, an inactive volcano. There's Tehran again. Am I doing it again? You're trying to tell me something? No. Okay. Okay, this is the work of some Iranian artists. The top one is an amazing place that I've never been to, but I'd love to go, called the House of Poems, and where customers write poetry, and they post it on the wall there. So, and these are two works of art from Iranian artists. So, there is actually a very vibrant art scene in Iran, and apparently a very vibrant theater scene too. So. Yeah, and so there's the woman I just mentioned who stripped in front of, in downtown Tehran in front of Azad University. So, I thought it was appropriate to end with images of Iranian women removing their headscarves. So, that's it. Okay.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. There are, I think, still copies of Dzanc available. Yes, I see a thumbs up. If y'all want to check it out, we're gonna linger in the room a little bit for a signing if you want to come up and get your book signed. And then for all my fabulous students, I will see you back in the classroom for Q&A in just a little bit. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful break. We'll see you back on December 4th.
Like,
I brought some pens. Oh.